welcome back to the GT Improvement course. We are on part 8 and we are transitioning to fractions, everybody's least favorite topic. I don't know what it is about fractions. I think that somewhere along the lines in 4th, 5th grade, they just got really scary and confusing. And I promise you, now that you're a little bit older, this concept is going to come to you much faster than it might have when you were younger, unless you had a really great teacher. So let's just review a fraction. What is a fraction? A fraction is just a piece of a whole, right? We're not talking about, whole numbers. We're talking about bits and pieces. I know we think about pies, pizzas, candy bars. Those are the type of things that can work with fractions because all of those are generally broken into pieces. So a couple terms you need to be cognizant of are when you have a fraction, the top number is your numerator and the bottom number is your denominator. So this fraction, 2/3, if you were to represent 2/3 in a picture, let's say you had a candy bar and you separated it into 3 equal pieces. If you had eaten 2 of those pieces, you would have eaten 2/3 of your candy bar and you would have 1/3 remaining. The denominator tells you how many pieces are in the whole. The numerator tells you how many pieces you ate or how many pieces of that whole you actually have. So in terms of 2/3, if you ate 2/3 and you have 1/3 left over, the whole would be represented by 3/3 because 3 of these pieces makes 1 whole candy bar, okay? So when we talk about adding and subtracting fractions with like denominators, like number 1, 3/5 plus 1/5. If you have a common denominator, that is going to be the denominator in your answer. Okay? So if you have a common denominator, that's the denominator in your answer. Now all we need to do is add the tops. 3 plus 1 is 4. And we're done. Okay? Not that scary, right? All right, moving on to number 2. Again, we have a common denominator, which in this case is 9. That means that 9 is going to be the denominator in my answer. And I'm going to add the tops. 4 plus 1 is 5. Done. Not as scary as you thought. All right, let's do subtraction. Same principle. We have a common denominator of 8. That's going to be the denominator in my answer. I'm just going to subtract the tops. 7 minus 2 is 5. Okay? Go ahead and do, I think you've got it. So go ahead and do 4, 5, and 6 on your own. I'm going to do them on my paper quietly. All right, so you should have ended up with 5/12, with 5/7, and with 4/30. Okay? All right, so hopefully that's sunk in. When you're adding and subtracting fractions, you need a common denominator. In all these problems, we had a common denominator, which was going to be the denominator in our answer. All right? Okay, next we're going to talk real quick about reducing fractions. When you reduce fractions, it's also called simplest terms. All we're doing is we're dividing the numerator and the denominator by the same number. We're trying to make fractions smaller because smaller numbers are easier to work with, okay? So, for example, 3/9. What we are doing is we are looking for a number that both 3 and 9 can be divisible by. Well, both 3 and 9 are divisible by 3. It has to be the same number. You can't divide by different numbers. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3. So this fraction of 3/9 can be reduced to 1/3. Okay, let's move on to number 2. Can you think of a number that both 10 and 12 are divisible by? You can start with 1 and work your way up. Yes, they're both divisible by 1. Every number is. They're both divisible by 2. Sure are. I could start there. You could always start with dividing by 2 if you can. So that would get you 5/6. Can that be reduced anymore? No, it cannot, because 5 and 6 are only both commonly divisible by 1. All right, let's do 6/15. Are they both divisible by 2? No. Are they both divisible by 3? Yeah, they're both divisible by 3. So that would make this 2/5. That can't be divided anymore, so we're done. All right, 25/50. All right, 25 isn't divisible by 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. But 5 is divisible by both of these. So we could start with 5. 25 divided by 5 is 5. 50 divided by 5 is 10. Could we continue dividing? Yes, we could divide both of the top and bottom by 5 again. That would be 1 and 2. Now, one trick about these types of fractions for 1/2. If this number is half of this number, you can just automatically reduce to 1/2. So for example, 50/100ths or 150 300ths. Those would all be able to be reduced to 1/2 because the top is half of the bottom. All right, let me give you a little trick about number 5. If the top number and the bottom number both end in 0, you can cancel common zeros. It's like you're dividing both by 10, okay? And even if there was another 0 here, you could cancel that 0 as well, okay? So this would be reduced to 9/10 because you can't reduce any further than that, okay? All right, let's talk about when you're adding and subtracting fractions and you have unlike denominators. Before we can talk about unlike denominators, we need to talk about common multiples. So let's talk about the word multiples. And I'm just going to bring out my handy dandy multiplication chart right here. Multiples of a number are just what it sounds like. The multiples of 2 are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, so on and so forth. The multiples of 7 are 7, 14, 21, 28. Multiples of 10, I think you get the picture, okay? So, for example, if you were doing the multiples of 3, which are 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, etc., and the multiples of 5, 5, 10, 15, 20, what you are looking for with a common denominator is the lowest common multiple. So in our example of 3 and 5, which one is the lowest common? It would be 15. That is what you are looking for when you are looking for a common denominator. So when you add or subtract fractions, you must have a common denominator. We had those in our examples before. Now here are some examples with unlike denominators. So how we're going to solve these is what I like to do just to keep myself organized. I have 1/3 plus 2/5. I need a common denominator. So what I'm going to do just underneath is I'm going to rewrite my fraction problem, and I'm going to find my lowest common multiple. So we already talked about multiples of 3 and 5, and we found that the lowest common multiple was 15. So that is going to be my new common denominator. Please excuse my dog. She's hungry and she's barking for me to give her food, so hopefully she won't be annoying. Okay, so here we have our common denominator. Just like before, whatever your common denominator is, that's going to be the denominator in your answer. All right, now here's the tricky part. What you need to do to fill in these blank spots up here, this is what you're going to ask yourself. What did you multiply 3 by to make 15? You multiplied it by 5, right? You're going to do the same thing to the top number. Whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do the same thing to the top. So 3 times 5 is 15. 1 times 5 is 5. What we are doing is we are creating an equivalent fraction, okay? And we'll talk about those more later. So for our second fraction, again, you have to ask yourself, what did I do to 5 to turn it into 15? You multiplied it by 3. And whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So the number that's going to go here is 2 times 3, which is 6. Now I have my common denominator, I have my equivalent fractions. Now all I need to do is add my tops, so that would be 11/15. I'm going to pause for a second and feed my angry chihuahua. Okay, so I know this sounds like a long process, but I promise you, the more you do it, the faster you're going to get at it, and you won't even have to think anymore. It'll just become automatic. So let's move on to number 2. So common multiple of 4 and 3. Well, I know you could even write it out. The multiples of 4 are 4, 8, 12, 16. The multiples of 3 are 3, 6, 9, and 12. So right away I see my lowest common multiple is 12. All right, so underneath here I'm going to rewrite my fraction using my lowest common denominator. Now, some of you may have learned that what you can do to find a common denominator is simply multiply the bottom numbers. 4 times 3 is 12. 3 times 5 is 15. This absolutely works, but the thing to keep in mind is it doesn't necessarily always give you the lowest common multiple, and I have some examples of that for down here, so we'll talk about those in a minute. All right, but going back to this one. So our common denominator is 12. Our next step is we need to rewrite it with the numbers on the top. So what do we do to 4 to turn it into 12? We multiplied it by 3, and whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So this number is going to be 9. And then for here, we multiplied 3 times 4 to make 12. So I'm going to do the same thing to my top. It's going to be 8. I have my common denominator. That's the denominator in my answer. And then 9 plus 8 is 17. Now this is what we call an improper fraction. We'll talk more about these later, okay? So just hold on to this one in the back of your head for a minute. Moving on to number 3. See if you can find the lowest common multiple. Did you choose 54 because you just multiplied 6 times 9? Or did you actually remember that 18 is also a common multiple of both 6 and 9? Yes, you could do 6 times 9 is 54, but then your numbers end up being bigger, and most likely you're going to have to reduce later, so it may make more work. But again, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. You do whatever way is easiest for you. That is absolutely a strategy, but remember, we are looking for the lowest common multiple, and the lowest common one is, the numbers are going to be smaller and easier to work with. All right, so I'm going to rewrite my problem. with my common denominator of 18. So see if you can fill in the top numbers. Hopefully you ended up with 3/18 plus 10/18, which is equal to 13/18. All right, let's do this next one. This is subtraction. Now your lowest common multiple here is going to be interesting. Multiples of 20 are 20 and 40. Oh, right away, one of my multiples is actually already in the second fraction. So that means I only need to change one fraction, which is going to be easier. If you would have multiplied those two together, you would have gotten 800, and then your life would have been annoying. So I'm going to use 40. This fraction doesn't change because it's got the same denominator. And then to turn 20 into 40, we multiplied by 2. So that times 2. 8/40. 8 minus 7 is 1. Denominator stays the same. All right, I'm going to have you do these next two on your own, and I will do them quietly off to the side. Go ahead and pause your video, and then I'll show you the worked out answers when you come back. All right, so here are your answers for 5 and 6. For this one, the common denominator worked out to be 60. So we multiplied 12 by 5, so multiplied 7 by 5. That's 35. Multiplied 5 by 12, so multiplied 3 by 12. That's 36. And then we add those numbers together and we get 71/60. Again, another improper fraction. We'll talk about those later. And for number 6, your common denominator was 24. So you ended up with the equivalent fraction of 21/24 minus 8/24, which is 13/24. Okay, so hopefully you did okay on these two. If not, I will put a link in the description below to a worksheet that you can do more practice questions with an answer key. Remember, the key to this, just like anything else in life, is practice, practice, practice. I promise you'll get faster and faster and faster. What we're going to want to get you to the point of doing is you don't want to be able to waste the time in listing these things out. You just need to be thinking about the multiples of each number and finding a common multiple, which is, again, why knowing your multiplication facts is super, super critical. It will make the common denominator process so much faster. So make sure you're studying your multiplication facts. All right. All right. Next video, we're going to talk about multiplying and dividing fractions. So see you then.